then he doesn't owe a commission. So we don't use that. We don't use exclusive agency. We use the exclusive right to sell. So the listing agreement is a contract between the owner or owners of residential real property and the real estate broker. By entering into this property, the owner agrees to hire the broker as an exclusive agent to sell the property. The owner also agrees to compensate the broker for procuring a ready, willing, and able buyer during the listing period whose offer is accepted and closes. So that's what this listing agreement is all about. So always put the date prepared. It doesn't necessarily have to coincide with the start of the listing agreement. So always put that in. So this whole paragraph, it provides the broker with the exclusive right to sell. That's all it. So here's where the name of the seller goes. You list the name of all the sellers. If it's really important that if it is an entity, if it's a trust, if it's an LLC, that's the name that goes there. It's who owns that property. If the property is in trust, the trust owns the property, not the individual. So you list that. Here, you employs the broker, not you, the agent. The listing belongs to the brokerage. It belongs to Keller Williams, whatever office you're in. So that's really important to note. So that the beginning date, it has to have a beginning date. And as I said, it doesn't have to coincide with the same date that the listing was prepared. But here's what happens a lot is that you prepare the listing on February 1st, but the listing start date isn't going to go into effect until February 20th. So there's this 20-day lag time where it's while we're waiting for things to happen. Well, in the meantime, the seller is talking to his neighbor and says, I'm gonna, I'm thinking about selling my house and all this stuff. So either the neighbor says, I'll buy it, or the neighbor tells somebody, and a real estate agent comes around before that 20th, the February 20th, and he says, I have a buyer for you. Let me write it up and I'll represent you. I'll do the whole thing. Mr. Seller goes, well, I have a listing agreement, and depending on how well you know your seller, it's like, look, I can say the other agent can say, I can save you some money. I won't charge you as much as they're going to charge you. And so we can get this done. And your listing doesn't start until the 20th. Guess what? You can possibly have your listing taken away from you. So you should shy away from that. The best way to do that is to have the listing start on the prepared day, and then exclude it from the MLS. If there's things that have to be done, just exclude it. It's not part of the MLS. The days don't count. So that's a better way to do it. So you have a valid listing agreement, and it can't be sold away from you. And then the end date. This is where the end date. This is the end of the listing period. And I've seen contracts where it says to be determined. Well, you can't have a contract that begins on a certain date and there's not a definite end date. That's not a valid contract. So there has to be a beginning and an end date. Okay, so during that listing period, the broker has the exclusive, and this is the important word, irrevocable right to sell or exchange real property. Irrevocable. That means it can't be canceled. So only the broker or the brokerage has the right to cancel this listing. Not you, the agent, only the broker. It's up to the discretion of the broker, because that listing belongs to the broker. So you really need to, I get a lot of cancellation of contracts. Oh, you know what? They changed their minds. They got you really need to explain to you're getting into a contract, and this is really important, and you're on the hook here. You know, we don't have to let you out. So I mean, you're not going to really do that, but this is a contract. You know, it's a valid contract, and it is enforceable. So so just make them aware that that about that fact, and you should be aware. Um, and then the address is here, and the parcel number. And here, there's two boxes that you can check. One is if it's a manufactured mobile home, you would check that, or if it's part of a conservatorship, a probate, or a guardianship. That has to be disclosed in this agreement. So one of these two check marks. So these are the terms right here. The listing, you can the list price should be put here. Once again, you cannot say to be determined, because once again, it doesn't constitute a valid contract. There has to be uh, some consideration offered, and to be determined is not a consideration. So very important to put in that price. So the whole next section is the compensation to the broker. And this is really important. The amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between seller and broker. So commissions are negotiable. You cannot say um, uh, this is what the commissions are. You know, you can't make that statement. Commissions are negotiable. So the seller agrees. Broker's commission can be expressed either in a percentage or in a flat fee or a dollar amount. We prefer the percentage. And per your ICA agreement, you cannot, without management approval, um, offer anything lower than 4% total commission. 4% total. That's it. When you sign up for the office, that's in one of the exhibits. And from that 4%, if you offer 4%, then 2.5% must be offered to the cooperating broker. Must. So you would only end up with 1.5%. So just be aware of that. So and then excuse me, by entering into this exclusive listing agreement, the seller agrees to compensate the broker as long as anyone procures a ready, willing, and able buyer during the listing period. It makes no difference if the procuring cause is the broker, the seller, a cooperating broker, a neighbor, anyone. So so that's really important. All right. And then here, everybody asked about this 3A2, and that is this subparagraph is a safe haven provision to avoid paying the broker's compensation. A seller may be tempted to reject an offer from a buyer procured by the broker, only to sell the subject property to the same buyer after the listing period ends. The safe harbor provision reduces the possibility of this type of abuse by protecting the broker's compensation for a certain number of days after the listing period. The safe harbor provision, however, has two limitations. First, it only pertains to prospective buyers who, during the listing period, physically entered and were shown the property, or who submitted written offers. Hence, the broker is not protected if the property is sold to someone other than one of the broker's prospective buyers or related entities. Second, the safe harbor applies only if by the end of the listing period, really important, the broker provides the seller with a written list of those prospective buyers. Determining the proper number of safe harbor days requires a weighing of various options. If the safe harbor period is too short, for example, 30 days, the buyer has very little protection. On the other hand, if the broker demands a lengthy safe harbor period, the seller may not give the listing to the broker. So what is that date? A lot of times, if it's a 90-day listing, then for 90 days after the listing, you have that safe harbor period. Once again, don't make it too short, because after that period, they can now go back to those buyers and they're no longer under that provision. Here's the other thing, and this is really the big advantage of having everyone sign PEDs now, because if you have a listing that is expired, you now have a record of every single buyer that has entered that property. So you now have that list. You have to supply that list at the end of your listing in order for this to be triggered. But now you have written copies of those people who entered that property. So it's easier to do now. It used to not be so easy. So that's really important. So the broker is entitled to full compensation if, without the broker's consent, the seller withdraws the property from sale, transfers the property, or renders the property unmarketable. So if a seller decides to tear down half of the property and it's now not marketable at the price, technically you're owed your commission. If subsequent sale fails through no fault of the seller, the broker's compensation is limited to 1/2 of whatever the seller collects as money damages, not to exceed the agreed upon commission. So there is a default on the contract. Your seller gets money damages. You can get half of your compensation from those money damages. But most likely what happens, if that should happen, then you go forward and find another buyer, but that seller keeps those money damages. So that's just good for you to know. Okay, so here we're looking at, in addition, seller agrees to pay broker, and there's a big blank there. So what goes in there? Well, if you agree, or your seller agrees to compensate you for marketing fees, you can put that there. We allow you as an agent to recover the fees that you pay, the legal fee, the transaction fee. If you use an in-house transaction coordinator, you can recover those fees through this line. So you would put, the seller agrees to pay broker. I think it comes to 575, all those fees. I can't remember the exact amount, but whatever those fees come to, 575 flat fee commission. And it's really important that you say flat fee commission. You can't say administrative costs or anything like that. It has to be a flat fee commission, because there are very stringent rules about that. So, but you can recover those costs right here. The broker should specify the rate to the compensation to the cooperating broker. So this here is where you would put 2.5%. Or if you get 6% and you want to split it evenly and give 3%, that's where you would put it. A lot of people ask, do I have to split it evenly? No, you don't. But just be aware that your seller is going to know that you are taking more of the compensation than the cooperating broker. Oh, I want to go back. I'm sorry. Under additional terms here, because where was it? I'm sorry, right here. Okay, so right here, additional listing terms right here, additional. So what goes in there? Terms for the sale are set. What you can put there is that if the listing agent represents both the buyer and the seller, then the compensation will be reduced to whatever percentage that you come up with. Meaning, if you represent both sides, if you are a dual agent, if you're a dual agency, if you're representing both sides, then you will reduce your commission rate, and that's perfectly acceptable. But one thing I caution you is that if you have an agreement like that in your listing agreement, you must disclose that in the MLS. And there's a check that you check, and it's called BAC, and you say yes or no. You would say yes. So that's important. It must be disclosed in the MLS if you have an agreement with your seller for a reduced commission. So just be aware of that. This provision entitles the broker to receive his or her compensation through escrow, thereby avoiding any problems. So that's what the seller hereby assigns broker the above compensation. That's what that says. It also, the next line is where you would put, if it was represented by a broker before, you would list all of those other brokers right here. And that is the first page. Let's see.
Can I jump in with a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so one question is about the flat fee commission.
Yes.
Is it always paid by a seller or only when the home is not sold? Well,
no, it would be
the flat fee commission is,
the flat fee commission would be paid by the seller in this instance. And there is in the Keller Williams addendum, when it's signed by a buyer, if you're working with a buyer, that's where you can recover your money, your fees to the buyer. That's done in the Keller Williams addendum. That is the first paragraph of the addendum. So you need to make sure that when you're working with a buyer, that you go over that in the Keller Williams addendum, that there is a flat fee commission, yes, to the buyer of X amount of dollars. It's in that addendum. Okay. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
all right.
One more question is, sure. This agent says, I have seen some agents pay 2% to the broker for homes for sale, and also have seen agents pay $0 for leases. Is this allowed?
As long as they're, yes. Yes, in the MLS, the cooperating broker compensation is listed in the MLS, and as long as we have a data share agreement with whatever MLS you're looking at, then that is the offer of compensation. So if they're offering 2%, they can offer 2%. But all of the Keller Williams offices, it's in your sign-up package that you must offer 2.5% to the other side. So And regarding leases, yes, there are companies that contract with a landlord just to put something in the MLS, and they don't offer compensation. So, and what they say is you have to get your compensation from the seller directly, or you get it from your buyer, or wherever. But they charge the landlord a fee just to put it in the MLS.
Okay.
So that's what that's about.
And then would you be able to review what are the major differences between this RLA and the previous version?
There isn't major differences. I don't know what they changed here. I think they didn't change anything on this page. I'll if I come across something that stands out at me that they did change, then I'll make note of it. But I think it was just stuff that had to do with agency. There was some changes in agency, and they may have changed a word here and there, and that probably was just the change, and that triggers a change of the form.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
And I could tell you it was revived 6 of 20. Then probably it was about clear cooperation, because clear cooperation started May 1st of 2020. And so that's probably what the change was.
Right.
Okay. So page 2, items included and excluded. It's really important to get what are included and excluded from your seller. I want grandma's chandelier. I want to take that with me. Well, I would suggest to replace it before anybody looks at it, because people are going to fall in love with grandma's chandelier, and that they're going to want it, and it's going to be a sticking point. So if they want to take things that are fixtures, it's best to instruct them to take them, to remove them before you list it, because once somebody sees how beautiful it is, they want it, or they see that it's excluded, they want it. It's important to note what's included and excluded in the MLS. And this is also important. When you get an offer, just because it's written in the MLS doesn't mean that it translates to the offer. So if if grandma's chandelier has to be excluded, and it's not written in the purchase agreement, but it's in the MLS, and you as a listing agent think, well, I'm covered, it's in the MLS, but it wasn't excluded in the RPA, make sure it's excluded in a counter. Because if it's not in the RPA, it's not addressed in the RPA, it doesn't exist, and it causes a lot of problems. So that's really, really important. Leased and not owned items. If there's anything that's leased, make sure that you know about it. Make sure you know what the process is in order to transfer that to the new buyer. All of that that needs to be disclosed. Okay, this is most likely what was changed to answer your question. The multiple listing service. So this is a disclosure of what the multiple listing service, or the MLS, and its purpose and function as both a public marketing tool and a method of offering compensation to the cooperating broker. Section 5B discusses what information will be provided to the MLS for use by the members, even if the property is not listed in the MLS, and provides that the seller agrees to give a copy of the listing to the MLS if requested by the MLS. If you're excluding for ChrisNet, you have to send them the first and last page of the listing and the exclusion, That's a must. For those of you in CRMLS, my South Bay and my coastal properties agents, it must be registered on the MLS. You don't have to send paperwork, but you must register an excluded listing. That's without a doubt. Claw members for West Side, you have to send the first and last page and the SLM to the MLS to exclude it. And that's within 2 business days of a fully executed contract, a fully executed contract. So within 2 business days, that has to be submitted. In regards to I lost my train of thought, so I'm going to go on, and it will come back to me. Right here, this section provides disclosure on which MLS the broker belongs to. So wherever you're a member of, or whatever MLS system you use, you put it here. ChrisNet is SRAR. The MLS is GLAR. CRMLS is the South Bay and Coastal. And this is in regards to opting out of the MLS. So this is an intensive discussion of the benefits of marketing the property in the MLS. This section also identifies the limitations on the marketability of the property will not be placed on the marketability of the property if the property is not placed in the MLS. The seller and broker agent should initial where indicated to confirm that the seller has read this section. Okay, I don't need to initial this. I know it says brokers, agents, initials. I don't need to initial it. You as the agent is sufficient to initial it. So basically, and here's the thing, I'm going to go into this next section, clear cooperation. Once again, this is probably what changed in June. Clear cooperation. This section states that the MLS follows clear cooperation policy requiring that 1 to 4 residential and vacant lot listings be submitted to the MLS within 1 business day of any public marketing. Now, 1 business day of any public marketing, that listing has to go into the MLS. If your MLS does not follow MLS, none of the MLSs that belong in this vicinity, they all belong to clear cooperation. So it's really important to stress to your client that once this is marketed, we're going to exclude it. That's fine. I'll do it. If you want it excluded, we'll exclude it. But should it be public marketed, and what that means is if it's on social media, if it's any public marketing, anything that a member of the public can see, no, I don't want to say that. A third-party website like a Trulia, can't say Zillow anymore because they're a brokerage, but if it's sent out to any of those websites, it's publicly marketed, and within 1 business day, it must go in the MLS, and that also applies to your seller. If your seller starts posting everywhere, hey, my house is for sale, contact my agent, my house is for sale, that's publicly marketing that property. And he wanted it excluded. Guess what? You have to abide by MLS rules, or else you're subject to a clear cooperation policy fine. And for those of you who are ChrisNet members, that fine is 1% of the list price, not to exceed $15,000. So if you have a $2 million property that's excluded from the MLS, and your seller decides to just blast it all over the internet, or if you decide to put it on KW Shares Forward Living, then that's public marketing, and you're subject to a fine of up to $15,000. So it's really serious, guys. Other MLSs don't have such stringent fines, but they can get up there. So just be aware. There are coming soon statuses, and there are different rules for different MLSs as far as coming soon. Many sent me something the other day, and nobody's gotten back to me from the MLS. But suddenly, the MLS, it seems, will allow showings in coming soon. Nobody has confirmed that to me. I know that ChrisNet allows showings in coming soon. CRMLS does not. So it's important to know what MLS you're dealing with and what the rules are as far as coming soon. Days on market or days in the MLS don't count in excluded listings or in coming soon. Just be aware of that. So that is page 2. I'm going to move on unless there's any questions. I'm not hearing any. Okay. So, and this is where if your seller wants to exclude it, you check this box and it automatically generates the SCLM, seller exclude listing from the MLS. And that's where your seller instructs you not to submit it to the MLS. Seller instructs broker not to market the property to the public. Well, that kind of goes hand in hand. And you would not check clear cooperation policy does not apply because it applies to every MLS that I am speaking to here. This section, the seller is informed that MLS rules allow for certain information about the property will be made available to other internet sites, and that seller can opt out of certain sharing features. If the seller wants to opt out of certain features, the seller must sign a separate opt-out form, which is the SELI, which is Seller Exclude Listing from the Internet. If they don't want the property to be sent to third-party websites like Realtor.com or Trulia, and those types of websites, then they would need to sign this form to instruct you not to do that. And when you're inputting your listing, at the end of the input, there is, do you want this to go out to the internet? And you can click no, and it will not be sent. Okay. Seller's representation. Seller represents that seller has no knowledge of certain facts likely to affect the marketability of the property, such as recorded notices of default, delinquent obligation, bankruptcies, pending or threatening lawsuits. If the seller becomes aware of the existence of any of these facts, seller shall give a disclosure to the broker. Very important. You should know that first off, when you're going on a listing appointment, pull a title report. Our Clearmark will run a title report for you. Doesn't cost anything. It'll show, it will make sure that you're dealing with the person who actually can sell that house. That's important. And it'll also show the liens that are on that house, if there are judgments on that house. If you're going on a listing appointment and your seller has, you know, $100,000 in IRS, you have an IRS lien on that house, and they have so much of a burden as far as a mortgage, it may not be worth your time to do it. You know, so you gotta think about those things. Brokers and sellers' duties. The broker agrees to work diligently to achieve the purposes of the listing agreement. What's the purpose of the listing agreement? To sell it. So the seller can agree to pay for certain pre-sale reports, which facilitate the sale of the property. Years ago, it was usually a practice, and I know that it probably in Northern California it still is, to do an inspection report before you sell the house to know what they're dealing, gives the seller time to do it. There's conflicting theories about that, because if the buyer should never depend on a seller's report because they didn't pay for it. Once something is disclosed in a report that you have in your hand, you now have to hand that over to any potential buyer because it becomes material fact. You can counteract what's on that if you fix it. So whatever kind of works for you. But anyways, that's what that's about. Deposit. The seller's authorizing the broker to accept deposits on their behalf. Do we accept deposits on sellers' behalf? No. Don't touch a check. The minute you touch a check, it has to be logged, it has to be copied. Don't touch a check, and just let them wire it directly to escrow. You don't want to deal with that. Agency relationship, very important. Prior to getting to this listing agreement, the very first thing that you have is an agency disclosure, an AD. And that establishes, that's California law. You have to establish the types of agencies that exist, and possible representation of more than one buyer or seller is also in here somewhere. I think that's the next page. Sorry, I skipped ahead. And possible dual agency. Remember, the listing belongs to the broker. So if one agent from your office represents the seller and one agent from your office represents the buyer, that's dual agency because the listing belongs to the broker. So it's really important. So I will move to the next page unless there's any questions, Kim or Max or whoever's there.
Hi, Rich.
Hey, Max.
So unfortunately, we only have 5 more minutes because we have another meeting going on. I would like to ask from you if it's possible. We had a couple of questions on Facebook.
Sure.
So if you would be able to reply to them directly to the KW shares, that would be really great, as we are running out of time. This session was very informative. So what do you think?
Okay, I'm not done yet. I'm taking my 5 minutes, and actually, I should have 10 minutes because I should have. I'm going to take it. I'm just going to take it, and I'll answer the questions on Facebook. So, because it's really important, potential competing buyer and seller. That is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. So it's important to disclose that to potential sellers and or buyers. This is really important. Security, insurance, showings, and audio and visual video things. So we're not liable if during an open house, when we can do open houses, or even during a showing, something is stolen. You need to make them aware of that and that they need to be covered. Make sure that they have insurance. It's their responsibility. So that's really, really important. Photographs and internet advertising. Photographs, it helps in the marketing. There are some sellers who don't want photographs. MLS rules say that you need to have at least one exterior photograph. So if that's what they want, but if sellers don't object to photographs being taken, it's important that they know that you own the photographs. It's also very important because I get these requests all the time. The seller wants the photos removed after the close of escrow, or the buyer wants the photos removed after the close of escrow. The MLS has the responsibility by law to maintain data in the MLS for 3 years. They are under no obligation to remove any photographs. So that's important. Now, those photographs that are sent out to third-party websites, the seller or the buyer can contact them directly in regards to those photographs being removed. But as far as the MLS, they most likely, I mean, I'm fine making the request, but the last time I made a request, they said no. So I'm just letting you know. Key safe. If you have a key safe on that property, make sure that you have them sign a key safe addendum, KLA. And if it's tenant occupied, the tenant has to sign for it too. Equal housing opportunity. Make sure, this is very in the news right now, you don't discriminate against protected classes. Attorney's fees, does it? No, that's that. Let's see, additional terms. If there was additional terms, you would write that there. If it's an REO or short sale or if it's held in trust, you need to add that form. And I think this is the last page. Management approval. This, once it's completed, within 2 business days, it also needs to be submitted to the office. Regarding management approval, is anybody not going to approve it? If you're entering into this listing agreement for less than 4%, absolutely, you have to talk to your team leader or your manager before. Don't talk to me. I don't make those decisions. Before writing those listing agreements, that has to be approved. So that's important to note. Successors or assignees. The listing agreement is binding upon the seller's successors or assignees, meaning if the seller transfers the property in violation of the listing agreement, just signs it over to somebody else, that new person is bound by this agreement. So that's important to note. First, we go, if there's a dispute, we go into mediation. There is no arbitration clause in this agreement, and entire agreement. This agreement supersedes anything that you had previously. If you had an email exchange between somebody, then this is what, as Judge Judy says, this is the entire agreement, these 4 corners. Ownership, title, and authority. The seller warns that he or she owns the property, that no one else owns the property, and that the seller has authority to both enter into a listing agreement and any subsequent sales contract. I know that the theory is 1 to sell, 1 to list, 2 to sell. If it's a husband and wife and they're in a dispute, I only need the signature of one of them in order to list. Theoretically, that is true, but you're going to run into a whole bunch of problems. It's better to get both of them to sign from the get-go. Representative capacity, very important. An entity, if it's a trust or it's a if it's a trust or an LLC, you must have a representative capacity on file, which shows who the authorized person is to sign on the trust or the LLC's behalf. And this secures, everybody agrees and understands and receives a copy and signs and agrees. Now, one last important fact is that if your listing agreement starts on the 20th, say, of February, but you don't get all the signatures from all the sellers until today, the 24th, that listing agreement doesn't start until the 24th. It's when the document is fully executed. It doesn't matter when the start date is, it's when the last authorized person has signed. So on that note, I only took 1 minute over than what Max was giving me. So I am going to get off and, okay, 2 minutes. And I will answer your questions on Facebook Live, and I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going, thank you, Max. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Rich, and sorry about that. I have Stephanie looking at me from across the room.
Max, I don't believe you. Stephanie would never do that. She
I
would never
swear,
do that to me.
Here she is. Here she is. Personally coming with me just so I don't.
I was not.
She was.
See, I knew you would never do that.
I wasn't. Yeah, I
All
think
right, I'm gonna get off. You can have your meeting. I'm gone. Bye.
you're off our recording and turn off.
I'm trying.
Thanks, Rich.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Stop recording.